Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, where we celebrate filmmaking, storytelling and cinema across the island of Ireland. So whether you're a diehard film fan or simply curious about the screen industries, make sure to subscribe so you can catch up on past conversations with creatives like Nasa Hardiman, director of Jessica Jones, and actor Clinton Liberty from House of the Dragon. So today's podcast has been made possible with the support of Fish Éireann, Screen Ireland and their wonderful Stakeholders Fund. And we are delighted to welcome back accomplished director Brendan Muldowney, whose fantastic thriller One Last Deal is in cinemas now. So have a listen to the trailer here.
Don't worry, boys. We've had some dark times. But Jimmy Banks is back. Are you there, kid?
Long time, yo.
I've had a lot of dealings with Madrid. If you want to play there, Jerome, I'm your man.
Yeah, bro. Hola, Jimmy. Everything is okay with you?
Well, I don't take cocaine for breakfast anymore, so yeah, I suppose I'm cured. What would you say to these two words? Jerome Sweet.
Deal.
Hello, Jimmy.
Easy for sale.
Everyone has a prize?
James.
You said I'd be happy. Matt Gravish was the top goal scorer in the Premier League last season. You're banking on nobody wanting my boy because of his charges. You're taking advantage of Matt, slapping a girl so that you can lowball. You're going to pay him what he's worth.
In all my years in soccer management, I have never met such an unprofessional agent.
Well, we call it football here. You fucking mug. Woo! Who the fuck is this?
This is someone who has the power to decide how the rest of your life unfolds.
Right, Jim, what can we do here? There's to be a way out of this. I need you to help me.
Someone has got some serious shit on us.
How much do they want?
4 million. Jerome.
I don't want to go to Madrid yet. What if I don't get any game time?
If this gets out, his contract will be pulled. Do you understand what that means for me? I don't just do this job. I am this fucking job.
If those recordings implicate me, I will put a bullet in your face.
I want every recording, and I want every copy.
The price just doubled.
Why? Why are you doing this to me?
You know why.
Who are you?
So thanks so much for chatting with us.
You're welcome.
You had a fantastic career. You've made some really interesting films. I see the clipboard for the 10 steps there in the background. I still send people that as just a brilliantly concise, perfect idea of a short film and the terror of the original.
22 years old now.
God, and One Last Deal, it's so brilliant, tense, present, well contained, excellently performed. And we'll definitely get to that, but I'd love to go back in time and talk about your journey as a creative and an artist to get here. Great. I was wondering if we start off just the earliest moment where maybe you felt that intense love for film, maybe when it crossed over to that first moment where you said, I'd love to make them.
It's very hard to really pinpoint it. I mean, I can pinpoint a couple of moments for you, but I know that it's a multiple of moments. And, I was always into stories. My reading age was very advanced when I was in primary school. When we used to be babysat at the weekend, the house we were living in, we were able to sneak around the back and come around and look through a door and watch the babysitter watching Dracula, Hammer's Dracula or something when we were too young. I used to love drawing comics and I loved reading comics. So I love stories. And then I do remember watching again another Hammer. They used to have the Hammer or House of Horrors. It was a TV show, which I actually have bought. I went out and bought it because it had such an effect. But there was an episode in it called The Two Faces of Evil, which terrified myself and my brother. It was a doppelganger story. It may as well have been Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but it was sort of terrifying to us. And I know that we didn't sleep and we kept knocking on the parents' door for months afterwards. And so we weren't allowed to watch scary things anymore. And I do remember then, say in school, everyone watching Salem's Lot, the Stephen King, the Toby Hooper one, and I wasn't allowed to watch it. So I had to make do with someone in the class telling me beat by beat. And again, I do remember like my imagination being nearly as good as watching it. Now it's not, obviously I've seen it, I watched it afterwards, but so all those moments would have built in. And then of course Star Wars came out when we were all very young as well. And the thing at that time was to go to Star Wars and McDonald's, which was new in the country as well. And I would say I went to 21 Star Wars and McDonald's that year because it was in primary school. It was 77. So age would I have been 8 or something. So I would have been we just went to everyone's birthday. So I just went multiple times and I never got sick of it. So that would have maybe started a love for film. I do remember also a BBC show, it was an art show, and I can't remember what it was now, but there was a famous gallery sequence in it where they had this music and they would show the photos that the kids had sent in, and they had a film competition, and people were making small short films. Kids were making them on 8mm, and I desperately wanted to do that. And I kept asking for a camera. I obviously never got one. I got a stills camera, which suddenly disappeared as well. But anyway, so but then as you go through school and, guidance counseling and stuff, they don't, like in those days anyway, filmmaking wasn't an option. And I yeah, I do remember watching The Wicker Man. There was a TV show called Alex Cox presented. It was called Movie Drum, and it was for cult movies. And I used to watch that religiously every week. And there was so many good films there that I watched and loved. But I remember watching The Wicker Man one night, and I don't know what it was about The Wicker Man specifically. I'd say it was to do with the religious aspect because I was probably exploring that element of my own life. And that film had an impact on me where I felt you could make, like, I suppose what they call now elevated horror. So, but then I had a long journey. I went and lived in London for a while, thinking I would get into a sort of post house or something over there. I ended up picture framing and things. And until my mother said, look, there's these courses back home. And I applied for a few of them, and I got into one called Communications in Pierce College. So it was a year course. It's like a portfolio course. I think they call them PLC courses now. And I did that year, and then we all applied, lots of us from that class, for the National Film School, or it was IADT at the time. It was only a 3-year course. And did I get into that? I did. You know what? Lots of my classmates got in, but I was on a waiting list. And I do remember going out for a whole week in September, and each day asking to speak to Roisin Hogan, who was running the course at the time. And she'd come out and I'd say, is there any news? I really want to get, and I finally got in actually after 2 weeks of this. And I do remember in the class, Anne O'Leary, who used to run, she said we were, I can't remember how she said this, but she mentioned she was impressed with some of the determination of people to get into the course. So anyway, yeah, I was determined to get in. I really wanted to do it.
God, to think of that now, how many people have, that much screen time under their belt of that it's that the grow of it did. And probably in essence, what you've described there is interesting because it shows the determination and the resilience, but also, facing rejection very early on in a way that, like, and overcoming that thing. Like, was that something you were, like, conscious of? Did it sort of ever set you back at any point, or, was it just find another way to get in?
You can always have setbacks, but I don't know where I found this quote, but I used to say it to my producing partner at the time, Connor Barry. After I went back. It's a long story. I did the 3-year diploma, and I went back and did the degree in '99. It's where I met Connor Barry, who I run Savage Productions with, and we tried for years trying to get short films off the ground. And we used to apply to every scheme that was available with about 5 scripts, and we recycled and went every round. And we had a mantra, which was, because obviously at the time there was no internet, you'd get rejection letters, and it was until you can wallpaper the whole room with rejection letters, you're not succeeding. So in a way, there was this sort of a bravado about getting the rejection letters, but is also a sort of it became a sort of routine where we just went again and again. So I suppose what you're asking is about rejection. Yeah, it was a sort of unwillingness to give up, I suppose.
And then, you know, you're you did make some incredible shorts. You did go on to, build things. Talk to me then about, developing your craft. Well, it was something that you always had the drive to do, is pick up a camera and, document in some ways. When, like, was it college? Was it, the short films that came after that you were honing your voice, or what makes your filmmaking very distinct to you?
Yeah, I didn't really have a voice, I suppose, when I started in first year. I just knew I liked, certain films and I could maybe have touchstones of certain films that, like everyone would, their favorite films, but you've never really questioned. And that's what film school was good for me, I suppose, because there was an element of it was an art school. So we were in with the art students. There were certain classes that weren't even film, they were just appreciation of, I don't know, there was like, yeah, yeah, I've forgotten the name of it, performance art, and from the Dice Man, to I remember things like, and I don't know, someone somewhere will know what this is, but there was a performance artist who used to just fall off walls onto his face, and there's a certain point, or you'd see a toilet seat hung in a gallery, like stuff that you might think is bizarre or extreme, but in a way it was a good way of opening up my mind. Also, there was film appreciation, so I was exposed to films like a short film about killing and films that I probably wouldn't have come across, and so that was good. But then technically, I specialized in cinematography when I was in Dunleary, so in a way, that's where I was coming from. And when I finished in '94, the my first version of Dunleary with a diploma, I some people went into editing, some worked on film sets. I worked in video shops and thought I was gonna write, and and I wanted to learn the process of writing, and I still write. I'm doing the MA in screenwriting this year, but I don't think I'm a good writer. Well, I think I'm fine, but I don't think I'm in a league, with, say, someone like Jamie Hannigan, who I work with, who I think is an excellent writer. Um I think I'm good at certain things. I'm good at structure. I'm good at stories. I think my grasp of English is not as good as Jamie's. It just couldn't be. He studied journalism, and but I'm good at certain things. I think dialogue maybe is a weakness. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. That is what I decided to do, was to focus on that, and then that obviously helped because I started to get some funding for short films, and then and and I suppose if I was to go back to finding the voice, when in third year Dunleary, everyone who was graduating had to make a short film, and I suppose that's when you first question, well, what do I want to say to the world? What do I want to even do? And so I did, in a way, I did have to think about what had occupied me since 19, I think 88 it might have been, was a sort of very violent moment I had witnessed in the north of Ireland when two English corporals had been taken out of their car and lynched. They had driven into an IRA funeral. It was after a sequence of 2 weeks of hell, where Michael Stone fired into a graveyard. Um, just after the Gibraltar Three had been shot and brought back. Anyway, it was a sequence of events that just snowballed into this two corporals being lynched, and without even taking sides, I just felt sad for the violence of it, and I felt sad. There was photographs of a priest, Alex Reed, bending over one of the bodies, giving the kiss of life, and there was blood on his lips. He was just looking up, a haunted look into the camera, and they had stripped these two corporals as well, and I felt like their dignity was completely gone. They were in these white Y fronts and stuff. So the whole thing had a big impact on me. And I made a short film called The Blind Lemming Story, but it was a cartoon version of this. It was like The Hillies and the Billies, which was a comic I used to watch. And, it wasn't very sophisticated. They were called the Caribs and the Pews, I mean, it's really, they lived on other sides, but they were cartoon versions of my own world, Um, so, I mean, obviously, I was interested in violence, and then as I went on making short films, I think I was, yeah, I don't know where to put this. It's not necessarily religion. It's not necessarily. It's a sort of existential idea of maybe spirituality and what happens to us afterwards and how we deal with death and stuff. So I did definitely develop certain obsessions or preoccupations is what we call them, an artist's preoccupation. And so I definitely developed these at an early stage. And I think that definitely helped me write, and it definitely helped me make those short films. And technically I just evolved as I made films, as anyone does, because the more you do it, the better you get.
And that's interesting as well that you're spanning genres. You
Mm.
know, you're existing and telling stories in very different spheres. I think there's a darkness across a lot of them, like that
I would
pursuit.
have said I would have said that I love horror films. And yet the horror films I love are either really extreme or really, they're not standard horror films, even though I've made The Cellar and I to me that's a film for it's nearly a gateway horror. It's for children nearly, but and I don't mind those sort of things. But I suppose all of the other ones, as you say, there's a darkness. I would call them ho horror adjacent. A little bit away, there's a film, the most recent one I can think of is probably Speak No Evil. Not the, one with James McAvoy, but the original version of that. It's a horror film, but there's no supernatural. It's about people, and it's just, there's a darkness and there's a philosophy behind it as well. That's very interesting, and I think so I always look at my films in nearly that they're sort of skirting horror. Now I know not everyone else does, but it's helpful for me.
And probably the darkness in human nature as well, with that, like that there's a real exploration of you push your characters, to the
Yeah,
nth degree they have.
yes, there is that. And then, like you see, there's so many influences that come in. I'll give you an example. When I was doing communications, I did a documentary on um, Amnesty International. And so, I had never really thought deeply about the death penalty. And as I did that documentary, I came out of it firmly with the opinion that it was wrong for us as a state to kill, right? That it was just harmful to us to be killing in our name, no matter what anyone had done. And what nearly crystallized that idea for me was I was just in the in the waiting room waiting to talk to whoever was the head of Amnesty at the time, and I was flicking through a book on the coffee table, and I saw a picture of a hanging. I don't know what country it was, but it was a hooded figure, and there was two soldiers trying to put him into the noose, but he was wriggling so hard. And it was a photograph, but you could get this sense of a human not wanting their life to end. And I remember thinking, like, and I've sort of done this in a lot of my films, from Love Eternal to also One Last Deal, which is, can you create some empathy for a really bad person? Because I think it's very valuable for us as humans as well to come out with to be able to have empathy for even the worst of us. I think is an interesting maybe challenge. Let's just put it that way, because I think films are sometimes provocative and they can at least make you think. So, but that's where I've been coming from as well, within, say, some of the darkness, say like Love Eternal or whatever, is to try and see, is that possible? You know?
And one of the interesting ones, and I always give it as like I thought at the time it would become like this fundamental cult classic, but Savage, the like how that darkness is explored, the taxi driver esque energy of the piece, the pain, that how the information is revealed, the tension as it kind of slowly builds throughout was so strong. That in terms of, yeah, like building the world is like each one of that, like those really strong moments, like would they reflect sort of where you are at that point of what story you want to tell? And sort of there's a layer to this question where, these are the ones that we see that have gone into production. Were there other stories that were, the ones that just maybe didn't get it across the line for other points that would, maybe
Oh,
be doing something different?
uh, I think maybe there's certain influences that come back again over and over again in your life. So with Savage, I was dealing with again how I felt watching the corporals when they were killed. It was also just after there had been a couple of very horrific beheadings that happened in Iraq. It was at ISIS or whoever was before ISIS, even I think. But uh, so there was a couple of moments of just, and so without even taking sides, I was trying to. There was another story behind that. There was a man called Bernard Getz. He was called a subway vigilante, who killed or shot some people in the New York subway. But again, I was coming back to that original idea of how I had felt so just, and I won't say shocked, I won't say repulsed. What I'll say is I felt upset for the world when I had witnessed that in 1988. And I have written since a script. It's called I forgot what it's actually called. Hang on, it's right here in front of me. Um, it's called Why the Dogs Had to Die, which is based on Mad March, which is when the Gibraltar Three. So it's a true story. I've literally I did a lot of research and I wrote that. That never got over the line. Um, but was it where I was at the time? I mean, no, it was again trying to explore this idea of, and I love ideas that where there can be two sides and two arguments. And, I think that's, and I'm still doing it because the script I'm writing in the MA is based on, there's a couple of cases, the Padraig Nally case in Mayo, the farmer who shot some intruders on his farm. And then there was a case in England from a farmer called Tony Martin, who also shot some intruders on his farm. And, like, so unless by invitation, I don't know if you can see it there. That's about Padraig Nally, and this is the Right to Kill, which is the Tony Martin. So that's literally what I've been exploring, and I have to say, I'm literally just retreading Savage here. I'm retreading the idea of because I think there's gray area. I'm not sure. Some people will claim they were angry, having been burgled before, and they wanted revenge and they were waiting for a moment. And others will say no, that people had no right on their farm. They were terrified. And I find it really interesting to maybe go in and explore these types of stories. So it's probably a long-winded way round. Like you were asking me about with Savage, and you said it was a layered question. And I suppose what were you asking? You were asking, was it where I was at the time, or
As a kind of artist as well, like is that something you're ruminating in that moment and everything feels like that, or are you exploring different questions and different projects and these are just the ones that come to fruition? So
um it's whatever hits you, but these sort of stories tend to hit me a lot. But I do have other ones. I have one, Faith Never Made It Over the Line, and that is based on a short film I made called Innocence, which is where two kids are playing and one kid falls down into a hole and he says, go home and tell his parents. And the other kid goes home and tells nobody and just comes back every day and visits him until he dies. And we find out at the end, he says, he's saying, why are you doing this? The kid in the hole says, and he says, when you get to heaven, will you give a message to my dad? So, there's this sort of exploration again within religion and I suppose, yeah, the idea of, what happens afterwards sometimes, but religion, maybe, I suppose, because I also explored that in Pilgrimage. And I'm also co-writing with Jamie a St. Patrick revisionist story with. So again, we're exploring literally when the missions came to Ireland and when the pagans and the Catholic Church butted heads for the first time.
and in terms of, like from the earlier days of, I actually might go from moving from shorts to early features first. If you can kind of, you at this stage you are getting a sense of the types of stories you want to tell, strengthening the areas that you need to strengthen. And there, what was the moment that maybe like the successes where your films are being received in a certain way? Were there any kind of first few moments that were of note to you that you had something?
Well, look, if you win the Tiernan McBride Award at Galway, it's always something. So you know something's going right. So Innocence, the one with the two kids, and that one in 2002. So obviously that was good. And it does give you the encouragement to keep going. Um, and then, like the 10 steps, which I made. But it's so interesting because a lot of the other films, you're trying very hard maybe to make films with some depth or message, or not message, but with some sort of depth to them. And then you decide, right, look, I'm just going to make one for fun. I'm just going to make a scary movie that is suitable for kids. And so I'm relying just on atmosphere. And that was the most successful film I'd ever made. That one was a real award winner. It was the first time I ever experienced that sort of vibe, where every week there was a festival getting back to us with either, a prestigious screening or an award or something. And so, but that was great. That was great. So yeah, that would give you confidence. But I won't lie, it was incredibly difficult at the time. We were still shooting on film, 16 mil, so it was very expensive to make a feature. But by the time I made Savage, the red camera had just started, so it became a little cheaper, but not much. There was no POV scheme or catalyst scheme. There was none of these. So, and there was no crowdfunding. There was nothing like this. So it was sort of a bit more difficult. So I did find it frustrating. I made a lot of shorts, maybe 5 within the space of 3 years, or maybe 4, but I made a lot in a very short amount of time. And I definitely think, I was primed, and I know Screen Island, or there was the Irish Film Board at the time, would have been talking to me, but I just, yeah, I just either couldn't write, or I don't know what it was, but it was frustrating for a while. And then to force myself to write, I actually signed up to Filmbase to a screenwriting course with Stephen Welch. And I just said, this will force me to write. And I actually wrote the script then, because I used to write at night, and I used to write, a lot of the short films were written, like I would write 4 a night. I'd stay up all night. I think I wrote Savage in the space of a week before that course.
Wow.
And you were supposed to write pages per week and come in the next week with them. So I just drip fed what I'd already written. But it was nearly, I needed that incentive of something to force me to sit down. But, I also probably had to dig deep again, like I would have maybe when I was doing my graduate year, and go, well, what do you want to say? And actually, if you think about it, Savage was probably the same as the very first short I ever made. It was drawing on the same well of inspiration. It was still drawing on that moment of violence in '88, when what I witnessed it was just on the news, but it was,
And that's a very kind of inspirational story as well, that you're that's going on. And I remember that. Like, I remember that time. I remember it being in the cinema. I remember handing out Film Irelands to people leaving it, and the faces of their
oh,
faces.
oh
They were
really?
just like, oh my God. But like, it's the power, like it's the intensity of the depth of the film, and how like moved and impacted they were leaving it, that
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, because at our premiere in Galway, someone fainted, and at my brother went to see it, I think, in the Lighthouse, and he told me someone stood up at the end in outrage, started screaming and shouting at the screen. So,
and
definitely had an impact.
is that something you as a filmmaker enjoy, because there's a
You think
power
you
there?
do when you go out before you've made stuff, you think, I want to have that, but you know what? You're a lot more fragile when the film's made. So, and I've made a few now, and it's so, I'm not sure I've got the same sort of need to do that, but yet I do. I definitely, there's a provocateur inside me somewhere. It's still there.
And were there ever any sort of, sometimes as artists, we learn from the mistakes as much as we learn from the successes and wins. Were there any moments that maybe taught you hard lessons, either disappointments or failed projects, or, any of those beats at this, especially in those early years, that made you go back and reassess?
I've definitely been able to look at films, say Savage, for example, and see the weak points, and see how I could have worked, say, the relationship with the Nora Jane character in there way better. And you sort of, in hindsight, you're able to go, you know what, that they would have been better if they were already a couple. So I didn't have to go through this contrived sort of Hollywood sort of getting to know you going for a drink. It would have been much better if they were a couple and that relationship started to disintegrate. It would have been a little more solid and real. I learned things like that, but they're always hindsight. Did I learn any other harsh lessons? I did really that, like really, when you make films that are going to be divisive like that, you're going to get some pushback. And in a way, you've got to learn to just, once a film's made and it's out there, especially now as well with the internet the way it is, it's even more so. You've got to learn to nearly let it go. And if you're happy and you're proud of what you've done, you nearly just let it go. And but I did have to learn that because that was a shock. Because with shorts, you don't really experience that until you've made a feature and put it into the world, because it's a free for all. Then.
I suppose a lot of the shorts you're sharing with other filmmakers, and there's an element of understanding and generosity there that, like that in those audience spaces or people that are really, really bought into the world of film, as opposed to, yeah, that if it's out there for general audiences, um,
People don't bother to negatively review a short for the reasons you're saying. If they love it, they'll bother to positively review it, but they don't really go out of their way to go, I hated this. Why did this director should have been killed at birth? Like this sort of stuff you can read.
and in terms of like a lot of projects under your belt now, do you have a favorite child? Like, are they all wonderful in different ways, or is there one that you are particularly proud of? Because like Savage was the first one. The budgets were a little bit lower, but I really liked that. I just thought it was so powerful. Um, but yeah, like the budgets are getting bigger as you're going along. It's
Well,
the
not
releases are
necessarily.
getting.
It's
Oh,
gone on a sort of up and maybe a down. Pilgrimage was quite a big budget, you see. So that was probably now again, it may go up again if we get our St. Patrick off the ground, it will go up. Um, but is there a favorite? Not really. I can definitely see I can and I won't tell you, but I'm able to tell myself, I think, regardless of what other people say or reviewers or whatever, I'm able to tell the ones that I think I've done a better job on and the ones I've maybe failed a little bit on. Well, you know what I could say? Possibly. I think, look, I still love The Cellar and I think it looks fantastic. And I think, if you take it as if made for a younger audience, I think it's grand. But, I made many versions of that and I wrote many versions, I mean, and some of them were way simpler and I think would have been better. There was a little too much sort of Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew going on. That's my own feeling about The Cellar. I think sometimes in horror, the less explaining, the better. I just think, and that in the 10 steps, there is no explanation. You've nearly got to go, well, what does that mean? And I think, maybe The Cellar possibly should. But you know what? I wouldn't have got it made if I didn't write it. And then I wouldn't have made that. Then would I have made the next film? And sometimes you've really got to just keep working because if you stop for longer than 4 or 5 years, it's where what's happened to that director, do you know?
do you feel as well the bigger the budget, the more the voices, the more the financial voices, the more like is there creative freedom in doing things that are a little bit smaller or
You would think so, but still people putting it depends on the structure of the funding. It depends on who that is. So there's always voices. There's always people. And some films have an easier road than others. And um some films, and I would say Savage and One Last Deal are basically every scene I shot is in the film, in the order it was shot. And so I would say that that's a success in a way because it's very complete. You go out with a plan, you execute it, and it sort of turns out the way you want it. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't voices and things, but they weren't like there, as I say it. Every scene I shot is in the film with very little lines cut out and in the same order. Maybe not Savage. There may have been some order restructuring, but whereas other films like say Pilgrimage, Love Eternal would have had 45 minutes of scenes cut out. So a lot of extra material. So when that's happening, there's a lot of extra. And also I look back at that and often regret as I'm cutting a scene that is going to stay in the film, and I had to shoot it in half a day, and I'm stuck for footage, and it looks a bit rougher than it should have looked, and I could have done with another day to shoot it. And I know that I wasted a whole week of shooting on scenes that aren't making it into the film. So that's always a tough one to live with.
So when you're working on those, do you like it sounds like going into the edit suite, and I kind of think that it probably speaks to a lot of your projects that, and one thing that I would say is like a Brendan one is the tension, is the feeling, the like you're like as an audience member, you really are kind of like pushed in some ways. Is that something then that you kind of find yourself in the edit? Is that why those beats are lost? That there's
You're asking about the tension that you think
yeah.
is something I use, and you're wondering is it why the stuff is cut? No, I'll tell you. Well, it's interesting you mentioned the tension, right? So what I'll say about that is when I was I've always loved horror and maybe thrillers, and when I was in communications, I will say that was when I had to start studying the techniques of film. I had to write essays about it, and it was luckily enough taught by I've forgotten the lady's name there now. This is back in 89, I think, 90. Um, it was taught through Hitchcock. So my whole learning came through Alfred Hitchcock. So I watched all of his films, studied them, wrote about them. So in a way, that has been invaluable to me as a director, I suppose. Um, and is that why they get cut out? More so pacing than it is, because tension is nearly an individual thing that happens within a scene. I mean, it can be a greater thing in pacing, but it's pacing, I would call it. And and that's what it always is in the edit. If people feel that the film is either repeating itself or it's a bit too flat before it's got to people, and it's getting worse. People have their attention spans are less now. You've heard about the two screens, the Netflix two screens. So things are changing drastically these days. So you've got to be really on top of, I suppose, when you're writing it nearly, or as a director, is when you're going into it, like being clear. But you know what? I also love the edit process, and I think you can find wonderful creative opportunities even even as you cut stuff out, and sometimes it's really painful to cut something that was lovely performance and you really spent a lot of effort and it looks amazing. But you get used to this and after as the films go on, I've got used to it more and more, and I just accept it now when something has to go. So, well, I don't accept it straight away. I suffer for a week and then it's gone.
The darling is killed. So I might do a tiny bit of a compare and contrast then before we get to one last deal, because I do think it's so interesting. This is something that is so contained. Like the tension is incredible, but like that, it feels very, very structured, ramps up and then is relieved, and then the sheer performance of Danny is just phenomenal. And like that, like all the underlying elements as well just support that. And then and for something like this as well, the sound mix was so important, but it's very subtle and just ramps it up, and then boom, all the things are there. But because it's so contained, then maybe to compare that, if we go to Pilgrimage first and then say, like what was, like sort of the differences. Like, I mean, like you could not have two more different worlds. You could not have two more different things of scope. Like, is it satisfying as a director first to like occupy two different spaces and get to delve in,
Yeah.
like create a world and then go into somebody's almost inside their head?
So, you know what? I sort of love a challenge anyway. So, would have been one of the reasons that drew me to One Last Deal. It was Three Quick Breaths as one of the script I read. But I also, I don't necessarily choose something, even though with One Last Deal, that was an attraction to it. But I fundamentally don't go for whether it's a sprawling filled period epic or it's a contained. I sort of read the story really, and if the story, then it's okay. What are the demands of this story? Um, and the differences, well, they're obvious. I mean, that's just. I mean, Pilgrimage was an absolute learning experience is all I'll say, because when you have, say, maybe 12 people who and they're all nearly stars of their own right, like the Irish actors are just as good as the Americans and the English, and you've got maybe 12 people who all need a close up in a particular scene, and you've got half a day to shoot because you're on such a schedule. That's as a learning experience. Learn working with horses, stunts, the visual effects that you have to the way you work in, say in a battle is very different to using blue screen or green screen. What else? I mean, exterior for the whole 6, 7 weeks, in Connemara which is like the weather is mad. Um, and I'm sure there's more elements there that would waterwork, boats, that was, I have to say, and multiple extras and the horses. Did I mention the horses? They are difficult too. Um, that was a huge learning experience, I was prepared for it and I was, definitely up for it. And I had a great team as well. Like, people forget when you're making films, like there's a certain amount that you do as a director, but there's actually most of it is the crew, I mean, I teach in the National Film School, and I sometimes say, and obviously it's facetiously, I'm saying that if you have a brilliant script, good producers, brilliant AD, brilliant director of photography, you sort of the film might get made without you. You can sort of maybe, things can happen. Now there is a certain thing that the director brings though, which is there's these nuances of taste and these things where it might be either all over the place or a bit flat. So a director can definitely bring that color. So, but I do think the crew is the main thing. So that would be the difference there. Also, I'm always very prepared, but I was not like, I was a little looser with the style that was Pilgrimage. Whereas with One Last Deal, which was shot over 10 days, it, there was no room for messing around. I had to be the most prepared I was ever in my whole life. And I suppose the difference as well is like all my films have had a different style. Like I always like to go into them and go, what's the style? So Pilgrimage is I'm not going to try competing with Game of Thrones or something, so I'm going to go with a social realist style and we're going to do it all handheld. There is going to be no cranes, no steady cams, now in the end there was some drone shots, but that was the idea was to, and also because it's a little quicker. But it was mainly because I wanted it to have that fresh sort of feel that wasn't ashamed of its lower budget. And then so other films then, like say Love Eternal and The Cellar is constant moving, tracking, a more classical sort of style. Savage was again handheld, but it was using very long lenses, so very shallow depth of field, really tight close-ups. Um, so like every film has a style, and when it and I've experimented with them all. So when it hit like with One Last Deal, and when I read the script, I just thought, this is an opportunity to use all those techniques that I've learned, from handhelds to different lens sizes to different types of camera movement to different, So and because in a way, because it's all in one room, it was that was the that was the way for me to go, okay, well, how do we obviously the acting is going to be the most important thing. So it was like we need the best actor we can get for this. But then after that, as my job, it's, all those other elements, which is the camera, where what we're seeing, how we're going to edit it, and what you're going to hear music wise and sound. And so in a way, I really enjoyed that as well, because as you said, I have made a few films. I have learnt a lot over the years and I was able to put it all into practice nearly.
I might go back into maybe the first time you saw that script and your initial, or the story, or were drawn to that story and your initial interpretation of it, however it was when it was kind of handed to you. And then did elements of that change in terms of story or narrative as it's presented?
Um, well, I am notorious about turning down scripts and just not vibing with them when they come in multiple times. Um, but then in the space of a year, actually, there was another script that came to me and it was based on Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, but it was based on him when he was 17 in Harvard. And it was his, so it was before he was the Unabomber, and he was in an experiment, sort of mind control, MK Ultra experiment. True story as well. Anyway, that fell away because we were trying to cast it. The next thing we heard, Netflix were making it with Russell Crowe as the professor and Jacob Tremblay as the young Ted Kaczynski. Anyway, so sorry, the reason I'm saying it is in the space of a year, these two scripts came in. But when Three Quick Breaths, as it was originally called, came in, I do you know what I'll say to you is I read scripts and a lot of the times I can tell very quickly they're not for me, but I'll always finish them. There's been a few times I've gone, this is actually quite good, and I've been bitterly disappointed by the ending, and I can't think of a way of fixing it. So that one they go as well.
And if it's 80% of the way there, would you be like, oh, I'll do it, but only if you fix it?
No, but well, like there's no, how do you fix it? Like there was
Yeah.
one that came in and I remember going, I just don't know how you'll fix this. And of course there was no way to fix it. But I did love the setup of that one. But anyway, so Three Quick Breaths came in through Richie Bulger, uh, who had done The Cellar with me, and I read it. Here's what I'll say: I read it so fast. I read it in 45 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes. That's how fast I read it. But it's a very quick read, very little scene description, a lot of just dialogue. So it's like a play. And I read it very fast and I was going, is this going to disappoint me? Is this going to disappoint me? And, and I've read some reviews since that say the twist is obvious or it's predictable. It wasn't to me. I read the script and I was going, I didn't see this coming. And there's a moment as well where he sort of leaves the room. I won't go into it, but at that moment I went, oh, okay. And then there's some revelations and I went, oh, this is quite good. And then I finished it, and you know what it struck me as, and it's interesting because I'm doing the MA in screenwriting. I was saying to you, and we had to write there last semester. We had to write an essay on Greek tragedy. So, and Paul Freeney is really big on Oedipus Rex, and so it struck like without me, completely comparing them. It struck me as a Greek tragedy. It is this contained sort of one location script where and the creature like Oedipus Rex has got some dark stuff going on. He kills his father, he's sleeping with his mother without knowing it. And I thought, and so I suppose I probably went, okay, this is interesting on that. I tell you what it is. It just grabbed me as a story, really, and I finished it very quickly. And I went, and then I started thinking about it, and I started thinking that I could possibly. It's very hard to explain, but the scenes were showing themselves to me. I could nearly see that this would be a handheld scene. It's nearly obvious, it's a stressful scene. But I was also seeing that this would be maybe a wide angle, maybe there'd be jump cuts here, and when that starts happening to you as a director, as you read a script, you sort of have to really pay attention because the script is sort of telling you how to direct it. So it's a lot easier. You're not having to struggle. So that's probably the simplest way of
And
explaining to you.
and then casting it. So Danny Dyer, like it is, he just does an exceptional good, like he just maintains that it's such a journey you're brought on with him, that intensity, the psychology, being in his head for, what is it, the 1 hour, 28 minutes, is it? No point is the tension. Does it leave? It dissipates, it moves. There's such a kind of kinetic energy. What like was what was it like sort of looking for him and getting him attached?
Well, he's with the same agency I'm with, independent. So when I read the script, he's written as an Eastender. It's got that, to me, as I said, it's like a play. It's got a sort of, even within the language, there's a sort of musicality or there's a sense of, and I can, I lived in London for a while, so I could sort of hear the East End accent. And there's a few actors who obviously are like that, who could do that. There's Gary Oldman, obviously, Ray Winston, Tim Roth, maybe. There's a few of them out there who can definitely do an East End boy, but Danny was definitely high on my list. But Danny has said this. He said this at the Diff Q&A that there was, obviously, financiers and everybody wants to make the biggest film they can. And obviously, the bigger star you have, the bigger the budget will be, and everybody, So we probably went down that route for a while, and but I remember my agent had already given it to Danny's agent a year before, so they were primed. They were probably, and I didn't know this, but she told me after, like, yeah, they were nearly just went to playing the waiting game. And so, yeah, I was delighted when finally we came back around, and I think we also changed sales agents as well. It's possible. I'm not sure. All I know is that Vertigo releasing, who have Rupert, who owns it, in a previous incantation in Vertigo, he had worked with Danny on maybe The Business, The Football Factory, on maybe more films as well. I think Outlaws or something. So I think, he's well aware of Danny's draw within England. So then it just became very easy, and it became easy to finance because in a certain market, Danny's huge, you know?
And he is, I think there's just something inherently watchable about him. Like there's just like a kind of, he brings that level of authenticity. But I mean, he plays such different shapes, but he just brings that to him. So when you, like of all the people that you mentioned, all brilliant, all amazing, but I couldn't have thought of one I would have enjoyed watching more.
Yeah, and it's his physicality as well in the film. He's very physical, which is really enjoyable for me to watch. I mean, I agree with you. I like, but you see, in a way, Danny is Marmite, So some people, that's not going to work for them. But and as he said at the opening of the Diff Festival, he said, I'm going to paraphrase him now, but he said, if you don't like me, you may as well leave because he said it's all me. So I, but yeah, I love him. I think he's a brilliant actor, and I think he has been really good in the past in lots of things. But he's done so much, and so maybe then there's, and I said this in another interview that I hope from this people do see. And look, it's not just this. Obviously, Rivals, and there's a lot he's doing now. That it's nearly his second act. He's really showing his sophistication as an actor. And as he says, he doesn't do accents. That's not something he does. But he's good. And the Rivals character is so different to what he normally plays. So, you know,
Yeah, yeah, totally. I'm really enjoying that and him in that, and yeah, Aiden in that. Like it's that's such a like it's such a strong drama, and there's a real vulnerability to him in that space. That is something that we hadn't seen in him before. But yeah, that I think there's something about him that you do get that under like that sense of humanity. So when he's wheeling and dealing as you expect he could, there's something more interesting that he's not, the things that he's doing is horrific, and like I mean that's there from that first scene, but you tell it isn't there to his core,
But
like
what's interesting is he said when he read the script, he didn't like the character. And I'm sure I didn't either. But it's, if you talk to any actor and possibly writers as well, then, they talk about playing villains, for example. Like nobody ever plays a villain as a pure villain. You just can't because it will be one dimensional. So
Gary Oldman plays a really good villain as a villain. like he can
yeah.
embody evil and like pure evil and intensity. And like Tim Roth has done it as well quite a lot. But there's something about like the humanity being there when and he can play warm, but it's yeah,
That's what I'm saying. It's like, you can't just play a villain. You've got to find the humanity inside there somewhere to give it some depth and three-dimensional, sort of. Otherwise, it's not going to be as interesting. So you've nearly got to find, and and the script, is helpful in a way, but I think Danny definitely he has to work there to bring that humanity into it.
Yeah, but it made like that charm as well, and the intensity and the drive. It is the thing that makes you compelling, even though, some of the things that happens initially, and I won't say much more, but it happens very early, and it will be in the trailer, so it's not technically a spoiler. But they're fundamentally unlikable things, but you're still drawn to him, and in a weird way, sort of half rooting for him, which is very complex as a viewer.
So you don't have anyone else to, to go with. You put anyone under pressure and there's already there's going to be a certain engagement there, you know?
And in terms then of, like filming it, are there any, you've 10 days, like those intense ups and downs to have gotten, like that's a kind of tight time frame. But again, it's stylistically there. There's a lot of elements to it. Were you nervous when you saw the rough cut for the first time?
Um, no, I wasn't.
Because you're so
But
experienced, you have all those things. But like
yeah,
before
but
things are
I
finessed.
don't have, I hear other filmmakers saying that when they see the rough cut, and they've been told to be careful. When you see the rough cut, you'll think it's a disaster. I've never felt that. I've always been able to see the possibilities in there, and so I've never really had that problem.
Yeah. Okay, Grant. So you're the kind of because yeah, there is that thing where like those beats and the tension are the thing that brings you across. I suppose yeah, that if you can see that potential and know how it's going to cut together in the end, that's the intensity. But was there ever? So you kind of said all the scenes that you shot were there, everything was there in order. Did anything change then, or was it very precise, simple for the edit? It was just building that tension.
It was tightening. Um, there was some ADR maybe. Um, yeah, I mean, it was very quick at it. We started in February. We finished the end of March. I mean, it was 8 weeks or something. So, and I can tell when the film's in trouble because, well, I won't say trouble. That's unfair to the other films. But when a film is running into its 6 months of edit, that's not great. So when you finish the edit in 8 weeks, it's sort of gone okay, you know?
Yeah, and it that is fabulous. That then, in terms of watching it with an audience, like is that key moment? Because it wasn't too long ago the premiere. It was your first premiere, and it's nice. The Wildcard are on board there, so you had the kind of distribution pipeline. But is there ever a moment, or are you kind of testing it out with people and it's going to be a hit?
Well, we do test screenings. I've always done test screenings. They're always brutal as well because, like, there's a Q&A after, or if it's COVID, it's online, and then there's a questionnaire or very detailed sort of questions and things filled out, and that's quite brutal. I don't think we didn't do a test screening on this. I did test it with I teach in the NFS, so I tested it with some of the students there, and of course, students are great because they will be very honest. um, but you pick up valuable information. Um, but so what were you asking about watching it with an audience?
Yeah,
You watching it testing or just the final watching it?
yeah, I suppose like the final watching of it in the premiere with all those people in the room and that like
I always hate that moment, and ever since with Savage, I think, in Galway there was a particularly long-winded story, so I won't bore you with it. But that was a really interesting screening, and I think it traumatized me a little bit. So I never watched Love Eternal with an audience, never, not once, because it was the film afterwards, and I knew it was a very contentious film. There was like some dark ideas floating around that, and I just didn't want to have to sit in an audience and witness it.
there's the sort of rejection sensitivity. If you're prepared for a reaction to be bad, you sort of perceive it to be, even if it's not
Oh
as
yeah, you
well.
start like someone goes to the toilet and it's like they hate it. They've gone. So, but no, but Pilgrimage, I watched it in Tribeca, and maybe it helped that I hadn't written that. I thoroughly enjoyed it, Pilgrimage, that night. I actually enjoyed it as if I hadn't made it. I really enjoyed Pilgrimage. So that gave me a bit of faith again. I did watch The Cellar in South by Southwest, but I was jet lagged. The Shutter had brought us for dinner. We had had too much wine. I fell asleep in the
Oh
middle of it.
no.
So that wasn't a great screening. But I really enjoyed the Dublin screening. I sat down the front with Danny. It was really enjoyable, I have to say. I really, and it's it's short enough that it doesn't drag, and the score is great. So I just love hearing it on the cinema screen, and so I really enjoyed that screen. And actually, yeah, I thought that was great.
And in terms of sort of projects on your slate now, um, are you like how far into Saint Patrick's retelling? Because I was just thinking about that the other day, obviously for the time that's in it. How far down the list. Do you have anything as well on the back burner that's sort of, bubbling around, ready to come up?
The St. Patrick is really the one we've been working on very hard for the last few years. And thankfully that is now reaching, the stage where we got to start looking at financing and casting. And so it's an exciting period. It can take years to get to do that though. But it's nice. And then as I said, I'm writing another script and but all the other scripts, they're sort of dead. They sort of die. They go back into the Faith. The one I was saying is the remake of Innocence. It's really hard to make because it's a difficult subject matter, and yet there's no actors in it that you can populate with stars with market value. It's children, so that's an impossible one to get off the ground. The Northern Irish one, people really are tired of Northern Irish stories, but I think it's a great one. But so these things sort of disappear, but you never know. Sometimes you get an idea for. I tell you, the easiest is to say a good conceptual horror film. That's low enough budget. That's the type of thing you can get off the ground quickly. But I mean, it's not in my experience. I haven't done that. I tend to focus, pretty closely on one thing at a time, maybe. I mean, I say that, but yet this year I'm sort of teaching full time, doing the MA, doing this release, also writing with Jamie and the other one. So I mean, it's like I'm not really, I've got enough going on.
That's a pretty busy. And in terms then of, going back, number one, being a teacher, going back and being the student, and I'm sure it's Mary Kate and Ailish, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's
Yeah,
one
yeah.
more, there's
But
Vinny and
oh, yeah.
Gavin Burke. Who else is teaching us? Neil, someone called Neil Jordan, but not the Neil Jordan.
Oh
And
God,
Paul
that's convenient.
Freeney. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone.
Yeah.
Ruth, the director of The Blind Side. With me.
Yes, Ruth
Yeah.
Mead. Yeah,
And I'm
brilliant.
sure I'm forgetting someone else, and I apologize to them if I've forgotten.
And as someone who's sort of been very consistently, creating, working on stories, building things, I presume, developing things as well. Do you find, the space where you're sort of creating at the moment to create? Like, I know you intend to get it financed and stuff, but like that space is, wholly almost a collaborative space as well with other students and seeing what they're doing, and the aim of it is the script and not like to get financing at this exact point. It's to like strengthen it. Is that a different experience?
Well, I'm not sure. So, what are you asking? The experience of writing within the?
In the course,
Yeah.
yeah. As someone who's been in the real, very competitive world for quite a long time.
Well, I suppose what I can say to you is I hadn't written for what I've been co-writing with Jamie, so for maybe the last 2 years, but I haven't been writing for myself, and I'd forgotten the pleasure that I get out of it and the sense of small little triumphs and achievements you get after just finishing a day's work, and even if it's only 5 pages and a few scenes, though I'd forgotten about that, and that's sort of priceless, whether it's ever funded or not. That's these mini goals that keep you going creatively throughout, just your life. So it just reminded me again, and I'm nearly sure I part of me wanted to do this MH just to force myself to go back and write again. Not that because I probably would have done it, um, but yeah, but you always forget about it. And obviously when you get into rewriting and you're dealing with notes, it becomes a little more of a stressful thing. But when you're writing a script for the first time, so it's working from the blank page, that's highly enjoyable, I have to say.
Brilliant. And now, finally, one last one. Like, looking back over the years, what was your favorite moment or day or, experience as a filmmaker? What's that one bit where you're like, yep, that was the day?
It's very hard because what happens is you tend to be in the moment. So as you've just finished a film, you think it's your best film, and you think it's the best. So it takes a few years for you to actually like recalibrate everything. So it's very hard for me to and especially right now because I'm right in the middle of, what's the greatest. So in a way, my brain just automatically just goes back there to recently just finishing my pitch deck for the St. Patrick thing, and I'm so proud of it. Do you know what? I'm going to go with the diff screening there, sitting beside Danny, and he was sucking away in a pint, and he was thoroughly enjoying himself, and I just felt that was great because I'm so proud of him as well that I just, am just delighted for him as well, and I could see how much he was enjoying the experience. So I'll give you that one.
Ah, that's lovely. That's great. And I hope everyone else will too. It's just a fabulous film. Congratulations.
Thanks, Gemma.
So we are very grateful to Screen Ireland for making this episode possible, and make sure to subscribe to Film Ireland wherever you get your podcasts.